Hello and welcome everyone to the very first seminar of the International Center for Animal Rights and Ethics series on litigation and legislating for animal rights, which brings together leading advocates, practitioners, and scholars to examine how litigation and legislative strategies can drive meaningful change for animals. Together, we're going to be exploring legal tools from courtrooms to parliaments, and how they can help secure stronger protections for animals. My name is Paulina Siemieniec, and I will be moderating this session. I'm a doctor of philosophy working on animal law, ethics, and politics. And today is World Aquatic Day. So we are very fortunate to have Giulia Malerbi, Head of Global Policy at the Aquatic Life Institute, joining us for an important conversation on octopus farming and the growing movement to preemptively ban it. Thank you for joining us, Giulia.
Thanks for having me today.
Would you kindly be able to introduce yourself and the topic of our discussion?
Of course. Well, hi everyone. First of all, thank you, Paulina, for the nice introduction. And of course, thank you to the International Center for Animal Rights and Ethics for this kind of invitation. I am particularly excited today because it's World Aquatic Animal Day. So it's a day where we really celebrate and recognize this incredible diversity of aquatic life. But I love the fact that today we also get to highlight the need to include these animals into our legal, ethical, and really policy frameworks. So as Paulina mentioned, I serve as head of global policy at Aquatic Life Institute. And very briefly, what we do is that we work to improve the welfare of aquatic animals, whether they are raised or caught for food globally. So this includes species that are often, unfortunately, overlooked. And we're talking from really finfish to cephalopods. In particular, my specific background spans a little bit from animal welfare science and animal law. So my work is really trying to connect these two fields. So making sure that the scientific knowledge that we have available gets translated into how our policy and legislation is shaped and implemented. So about today's topic, we'll be focusing on octopus farming, like Paulina mentioned. Of course, you might have heard that has gained quite a lot of global attention, but I want to flag from the very, very beginning that the issues we'll be exploring today extend beyond just one species. So while the conversation, of course, will center around octopuses, it's really all about a broader shift, right? About how we think of these animals, we recognize the sentience of aquatic animals, the limits that confined systems entail, and of course, the importance of doing proactive and preemptive work.
Yeah, so as Giulia mentions, while there's this broad category of animals that falls into this, we will be focusing on octopus farming and the bans, what they are, why they matter, and how law and advocacy are shaping the path forward. So I think it's only fitting if we start off by saying just a little bit about octopus before we dive into the details of the Aquatic Life Institute's campaign. So from my understanding, octopus are highly intelligent creatures who live their lives in a particular way. And I don't want to generalize because there's over 300 known species of octopus. And they generally live solitary lives in the ocean. And from a purely descriptive perspective, octopus have 3 hearts, 0 bones, blue blood, sophisticated nervous systems, and large ring-shaped brains. And speaking of the brain, octopus are not just known for their soft bodies and 8 arms, but their remarkable intelligence. So on the underside of each of their arms, they have highly sensitive suckers that are independent from their central brain, but contain clusters of neurons that act as sort of like small brains to execute certain functions, like controlling their movement, tasting, touching. And their intelligence is also demonstrated through their cognitive and behavioral complexity, including their ability to use tools, solve puzzles, recognize individual humans, play, change the color and texture of their skin to match their surroundings, and hunt in cooperation with fish. So another small interesting fact about octopuses is that they spend most of their time in dens, which can be found beneath rocks, burrowed in mud, inside empty shelves, or even in discarded beer bottles. So they're known for collecting tiny, shiny objects and arranging them to create gardens in front of their dens. So given this tidbit of information about octopuses, Giulia, could you explain what farming them would entail and why this industry is even being considered in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for this description, Paulina. I think you really highlighted some of the top extraordinary characteristics that these animals possess. So we've just heard that they are particularly curious, highly intelligent animals who spend most of their lives really exploring, interacting with their environments in very, very complex way. Now, farming these animals basically means removing them from the context that we just discussed and placing them in um, like in small, like barren tanks. And this could mean placing them either like alone, which in the case of octopuses means chronic boredom and stress, or the opposite, which is grouped together, which often can result in aggression and cannibalism. And I'm sure we'll dive more into these aspects a little bit later. But just to talk about what the plans look like to date, one of the proposed facilities, for example, proposed to confine up to 15 octopuses in 1 cubic meter of space, which, as we heard, because of their characteristics, is just incredibly incompatible with their needs when it comes to like space, enrichment, and their autonomy in general. So maybe one thing that I want to also highlight before we go into more of the details and the consequences of this practice is really, why are we talking about this practice? Like, you might have heard that octopus farming was born to tackle the problem of food security, but in reality is really being driven by market forces. Because if we take a look at what has been happening in this past 50 years, wild octopus populations have been really overfished. The global catch numbers skyrocketed from 30,000 tons in 1950 to 350,000 tons today. So clearly, these populations are declining because of overfishing. And farming is sort of presented or pitched as, a way to maintain this supply, right? But without taking account all the consequences that it would have. And of course, as we'll dive into more, biologically, these animals are simply not suited to captivity, I would add, as many others. But they are particularly difficult to breed. Their larvae require live food. They're very picky eaters. So as a result, we've studied that some operations still rely on capturing juveniles from the wild in order to replenish their tanks. So this is just, of course, adding pressure to the wild populations that, as I've just said, are already declining. So honestly, the reason why we're talking about octopus farming today is because the industry found some attractive characteristics of these animals. For example, the fact that naturally they grow very rapidly. They have a very short lifespan. So these are all like appealing characteristics for the industry. But of course, in our view, they really don't offset the welfare harms that I'm sure we can dive into further.
Yeah, Giulia, the numbers that you mentioned are very difficult to even grapple with and wrap our minds around. So let's get into the ethical side of octopus farming. Why is it unethical? Usually when we ask why a certain form of treatment of animals is unethical, we have a background story of why that being has moral value and why their interests matter. How would farming octopus affect them, their relationships, their quality of life, and health? I'm curious, on what grounds is the Aquatic Life Institute arguing that octopus farming is unethical?
Yeah, I mean, we believe octopus farming is unethical for the same reason that we oppose factory farming more broadly, because it causes immense suffering. It forces sentient, intelligent animals into systems that just deny these animals the ability to live and thrive in a way that reflects their nature. But I mean, when it comes to octopuses, let me say this. We've heard that they are extraordinary beings, right? But let me clarify that I don't believe that their fascinating qualities make them somehow better than other animals. But these qualities do make the harms of confinement and captivity especially severe for these species. Um, at Aquatic Life Institute, in order to assess welfare for aquatic animals, that it's very, very complex to do, we turn to the 5 core animal welfare pillars for aquatic animals, which are environmental enrichment, feed composition, stocking density and space, water quality, and slaughter method. And I can try to quickly go through all these 5 points and share with you all why octopus farming actually fails across all these 5 pillars. So the first one is environmental enrichment. As we've heard, octopuses thrive in complex habitats, right? They create dams, they manipulate objects, they explore their surroundings. So imagine barren tanks or cages. They would absolutely deprive them of these opportunities. So this would result in, again, frustration, stress, chronic boredom. The second pillar is feed composition. Octopuses are carnivorous animals. This means that they need high protein. Generally, we're talking about live prey. As I mentioned, they're very picky eaters, especially when we're talking about the early life stages of their breeding cycle. So meeting these needs in captivity means that we have to rely on catching more wild fish or other marine animals as feed, which, of course, is not a sustainable way of operating, but also creates additional welfare concerns for the wild animals that are being fed to the octopus. Moving on to the third pillar, that is stocking density and space. As mentioned, octopuses are solitary. This means that, as mentioned, when they are confined together, they engage in like territorial aggression that can even lead to cannibalism because it's just not in their nature. Of course, as mentioned already, isolating them isn't really a solution either. It just results in boredom and even self-harm in some studies. So in short, there's no viable confinement configuration that really respects their social needs or cognitive complexity. The fourth pillar that I mentioned is water quality. These animals are very, very sensitive to the changes in the surrounding water, from temperature, salinity, and pH. They don't have external skeletons, they don't have scales. So while they're fascinating, their bodies actually offer very little protection from harmful conditions. So even a small, brief exposure to poor water quality can easily result in prolonged pain or even death for these animals. And the last point I'll briefly touch on is slaughter, because to date, there is like no scientifically validated humane method for killing octopuses. I'll just stop by saying that the methods that are being used so far just pose serious welfare concerns.
Yeah, so that's a really comprehensive breakdown, Giulia. Thank you for that. It's clear that the sort of standard welfare framework we're applying to other animals is just not compatible with octopus biology or behavior. And you mentioned slaughter as one of the core areas of failure. I'd like to pause there for a moment. What exactly are the methods being proposed for killing farmed octopus, and why are they so problematic from a welfare standpoint?
Yeah, thank you for wanting to pause on this, Paulina. Maybe a quick disclaimer for the audience. Slaughter is probably one of the most disturbing aspects of proposed octopus farming systems. So it's really an area where we need to dive into a little bit more. But yeah, just flagging that it could be disturbing. So as I said, currently there is no approved or widely accepted humane method for killing these animals. So the default approach has been the use of ice slurry. Allow me to simplify here, but basically it's a method where octopuses are submerged in a bath of ice and water until they die because of lack of oxygen. Now, this method, as you've probably guessed, is scientifically recognized as inhumane because of the severe pain and suffering that it causes. And in fact, several studies have demonstrated that octopuses that are subjected to ice slurry do remain conscious and can even stay responsive for several minutes. And I was actually just reading a new study a few weeks ago where some researchers found out that, and again, I might be simplifying here, but bear with me. Basically, when the body temperature of the octopuses drops below a certain point, a certain temperature, their muscles enter in a state that resembles death or unconsciousness. But this is a deceptive measure that these animals use. And in fact, researchers have actually warned that these animals may still be conscious. So their bodies may appear still, but psychologically they're active and they're still capable of experiencing pain. And this is not just, researchers or advocates that are saying this. We even have evidence from institutions such as the European Food Safety Authority that has advised against the use of ice slurry for a number of farmed fish species because of the welfare concerns that I just pointed to. So now the EU is looking into drafting legislation to prohibit ice slurry for a lot of major aquaculture sectors. Of course, this is a positive news, right? But it does make me wonder, if we haven't fixed this for fish, if we haven't solved this for fish, how can we justify, right, expanding these practices to new species, especially species as complex as octopuses? And maybe just to give the full context on this slaughter, let's say, point, I'm aware that there have been other suggestions. I'm aware that other slaughter methods are being investigated, like mechanical decapitation or CO2 stunning. But I think it's important to highlight that none of this has been yet validated as humane. So from a welfare standpoint, any current proposal for farming octopuses would really end in a process that first is completely unregulated, and secondly, it is proven painful. So until and unless that changes, and again, personally, I would argue that it just may never be ethically justifiable, but unless that changes, I think that the conversation about farming should just not even be on the table.
Exactly. And there's a growing body of research and science supporting those points. In fact, experts like Jennifer Jaquette, Becca Franks, and Peter Godfrey Smith said something along the lines in their 2019 article that one consequence of understanding the octopus mind is to refuse to subject it to mass production, right? So this is part of a larger story about factory farming aquatic animals in general. Most aquatic animals were not even being factory farmed until recently, when these intensive aquaculture industries led to 550 different aquatic animal species being raised in captivity in over 190 countries now. So half of the seafood being consumed globally comes from farmed aquatic animals, many of whom are suffering in these systems that were never designed with their welfare in mind. So, Giulia, we've touched on, the cognitive and emotional lives of octopuses, but this brings us to a broader range of concerns associated with octopus farming. So, could you walk us through how these concerns intersect? So the animal welfare, the environmental impact, public health, and why octopus farming is uniquely problematic across all these dimensions.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is exactly why octopus farming is particularly concerning, because it is not just a welfare issue, although if you ask me, the welfare concerns that we highlighted, for me, would be enough to say that this is a terrible idea. But from an environmental standpoint, for example, one of the most critical concern is the fact that these animals are carnivorous. So as I mentioned before, farming them requires large quantity of wild caught fish So we're talking about small pelagic species, which are the ones that are under pressure from overfishing. So this is a very inefficient and a big environmental concern. If we also look at the feed conversion ratio, that is roughly 3 to 1. This means I'll try to explain it, but basically in order to have 1 kilogram of octopus meat, you need to invest or feed these animals 3 kilograms of marine life. So, I mean, if you look at this in a simple way of efficiency, right? This is a very inefficient way of using resources, especially to date, where we are facing biodiversity loss and food insecurity. And also, if you allow me, it does create this cycle like this that has a logic that I cannot get around. So basically, in order to solve the problem of overfishing, we are farming, right? But in order to farm, we're going to overfish more to feed these animals in farm settings. So it's a cycle that honestly, even taking away the animal welfare concerns, it just doesn't make much sense on the logic point of view. And I mean, beyond feed, octopus farming would just generate the same environmental problems that we've seen in other intensive aquaculture systems. And I'm referring to pollution, for example, from the uneaten feed. There's the issue of fecal waste. There's the potential of chemical runoffs. All these issues that have contributed to the degradation of habitats and the threatened marine local biodiversity. Then, if we move on the public health side of things, we're actually dealing with a lot of question marks because there's so many things that we don't know and we still are investigating about the octopus immune system, so that the possibility of having these animals catching diseases and spreading them to wild populations is actually quite high. And let me also flag that there isn't to date any established veterinary protocols for disease prevention or treatment for octopuses in captivity. So I'm just really skeptical about what some of the proponents of this industry have said. We've seen in some of their permits that they've claimed that antibiotics basically won't be needed in their farms because their animals wouldn't get sick. You know, we don't think that these animals could catch diseases, which is a claim that ignores quite a big chunk of scientific evidence. We do know these animals can get pathogens, and I mean that's how usually disease emerge from, right? From confinement, poor welfare conditions. So I see all the main points to see a lot of health for public health risks as well. And there's also a biosecurity risk linked to octopus behavior, because I imagine that most of you know that these animals are masters at escaping. So should they escape from a potential farm enclosure, like in, it has happened in aquariums or research facilities, they could very easily introduce these non-native pathogens in the surrounding ecosystems. They could really disrupt local species dynamics, and especially in coastal environments that are very, very sensitive to big changes. So I think that given from what we know from other intensive animal system, this lack of regulation and this lack of preparedness, I don't know, these altogether are just huge, big red flags to me. We've seen how aquaculture, when it's poorly managed, can really become the perfect vector for zoonotic diseases, can contribute to antibiotic resistance. So when we get to assess octopus farming, again, it's about octopus farming, but it's not just about one species or one system, right? It's about zooming out. So if we think about the model that we are about to create, we are creating a model that really risks undermining ocean health, the fragile ecosystem, and honestly, that we're introducing avoidable threats to both animals and humans.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, the arguments that octopus are highly intelligent and would suffer so much in captivity for a number of reasons applies to many land animals that were factory farming, like pigs, right? So I believe there was a 2021 BBC article where this comparison was made, and it was quickly addressed by Dr. Elena Lara from Compassion in World Farming, who's a research manager there. She pointed out that unlike pigs, whose needs we are understanding through generations of farming and domestication, we do not have the same knowledge about octopuses, which who are wild, and thus we lack even the insight to know what it would mean to improve their welfare in farming them. And to add another layer to this, in a recent talk on the case and bills against octopus farming, again, Jennifer Jaquette, the professor from environmental science and policy at the University of Miami that I mentioned earlier, she referenced industry claims that the octopuses being harvested are no longer wild, that fifth generation octopuses do not have the same capacities, interests, or needs as their wild counterparts, particularly regarding mental stimulation. So, Giulia, what are your thoughts on these industry narratives? Do these claims of domestication, are they just being used to sidestep these welfare concerns? Is that what's going on here?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate how both, and Jennifer really have helped to shape this debate. And I think that they pointed out at some very good points, like our limited understanding of octopuses in captive settings is exactly why thinking of farming them has all these extra risks. Now, regarding what you said about the claim, the fact that the fifth generation octopuses are no longer wild, I mean, I do see that as a sort of a strategic industry narrative, maybe aimed at trying to debunk some ethical points before they gain some traction. I don't know about you, but I think that breeding a few generation in tanks doesn't really equal domestication. I'm not an expert, but I would say that through domestication, it's a process, right? It's a long evolutionary process that entails selecting for very specific traits, like I could guess like docility, adaptability to confinement, reduced stress responses, but this should happen over hundreds and hundreds of generation, right? And I mean, even among the animals that we technically have domesticated, like you mentioned, pigs and chickens, I mean, suffering is massively present in intensive systems. So this idea that I don't know, somehow we have eliminated the welfare concerns for octopuses after 5 generations, I think it's actually quite scientifically inaccurate. And to me, what's even more troubling is the implication that what saying that could entail. So the implication that mental stimulation, space, or behavioral needs are just no longer relevant, simply because these animals were born in captivity. I mean, that's not really how animal welfare works, right? Sentience doesn't disappear in a few generations. So, I mean, if anything, this type of claims make me think of like how quickly like the ethical argument can be sort of put aside when it gets in the way of profit. So to answer your question more directly, Paulina, yes, I do think that these narratives are being used by the industry to try and sidestep these welfare concerns that we touched upon. I don't know. I think that they shift the burden of proof away from themselves, like from the industry, when I really think it should be on them to demonstrate, scientifically and transparently that these systems that they propose do meet these basic needs of animals that they intend to farm. And I've actually had a lot of conversations with industry proponents about this. I've told them, convince me, show me the scientific evidence that I'm wrong. But at this point, I'm sorry, but this burden hasn't simply been met.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. The burden of proof would sort of rest on the industry proving these claims that they're making. So while the concerns linked to this practice are several, there is some recognition of octopus sentience in law that we're seeing. So in England or Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, they're officially recognizing octopuses as sentient beings, and this broader recognition seems to be expanding in Europe and New Zealand, and some interest in countries like Australia. So do you think that these legal developments will lead to stronger protection for octopuses, particularly in relation to farming them, or?
I mean, it's interesting. I do think that, recognizing sentience is a vital step forward. It sort of helps us make this shift in how these animals are understood within the legal system as well. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that these animals can feel pain, suffering, and can experience a wide range of emotion. This should also translate, into a sort of a moral and legal imperative to try and protect them. So you mentioned the UK, and if we focus on that, the formal recognition of cephalopod sentience, which, by the way, followed an independent scientific review, which I think is very, very interesting. So that formal recognition can really lay the groundwork to let us include octopuses under the scope of animal welfare laws. And this would be particularly meaningful because once the laws recognize that an animal's capacity, right, to suffer, to experience emotions, to interact with the environment, it should become at least harder, to justify systems that so clearly cause harm, and that would be preventable, right? Now, let me just be devil's advocate of myself for a second. Recognition, of course, on its own is not enough, right? What matters is that recognition is then applied. We've seen what has happened with terrestrial species, where usually legal protections come after, so they arrive a little bit too late once the industrial system is already established, right? With octopuses, the difference is that we have, on the legal point of view, sort of the chance to reverse this timeline, so we can use legal recognition as a proactive tool to prevent the establishment of a new industry. So that is the real opportunity here, especially from a legal perspective. And there's countries like the UK and New Zealand and others that are already taking steps forward towards acknowledging and putting sentience, this concept, into their legislation. And they can really lead the way, because once that is acknowledged, once that's inside the legislation, they can refuse to authorize farming systems that actually violate the very welfare principle that sentience recognition upholds. So yeah, I do believe that sentience recognition can indeed lead to stronger protection, but like anything, it would require political will, public engagement, and just efforts to make sure that sentience translates into protection.
Right. Yeah, I seem to, that I agree with you there, because it seems like the legal recognition of sentience would essentially be meaningless if there was no practical effect of actually protecting animals like octopuses. So just to switch gears here, some industry advocates argue that octopus farming could eventually become a sustainable solution, perhaps even reducing the pressure on wild populations or contributing to food security. But others have challenged those claims, right? So what's your view, Giulia? Could octopus farming ever become sustainable, as these companies are suggesting?
That's a fundamental question, because that's, whenever you read about octopus farming, that's probably what you're gonna find first. That is the most sustainable. It's a sustainable farming idea. I mean, I can answer very short. No, I don't believe that octopus farming can ever be made sustainable. But I mean, I can elaborate on that, because this is actually one of the main reasons, one of the core reasons why we decided to launch this global campaign. Because this industry, when we were exploring this issue, this industry is really being presented as a solution, as I mentioned, like the solution to tackle food insecurity. But again, the reality is octopus farming is really being built to supply luxury markets, right? So farmed octopus, they would not be destined for communities that are facing food insecurity. They would go to fancy restaurants, I don't know, in Japan, Spain, the US, and Mexico. These are all countries where octopus is really not a nutritional necessity. And you mentioned Jennifer Jacket before. I think she said in one interviews last year that octopuses are consumed and not eaten. And I love this way. I love to highlight this because I think it really makes you understand how much doing this, it's a choice. It's not something that it's a necessity. And I think when we're talking about sustainable, that really makes the difference. We've investigated a research facilities / commercial unit in Mexico. There's still some gray area around that. But basically in that facility, octopus is sold to commercial units. They would end up in, like, as I said, luxury restaurants or high-up hotel chains, not to the local people, you know. So if we look at this on the point of view of actually the local communities, right, the people that might actually be facing insecurity when it comes to food, the fish that is used to feed the farmed octopuses, again, are usually species that humans could eat as well. So basically this farm would end up really entering in competitions with these local communities to gain access to these limited wild fish populations, right? And we're not just hypothesizing this. We have seen this before with other already established industry of other aquatic species. For example, let me think of salmon farming. We've seen this in Chile and Argentina, where massive, intensively salmon farms really damaged the ecosystem and small fishers' economy, that it led to a ban on salmon farming in places like Tierra del Fuego. So really, if we're talking about sustainability, this is going in the opposite direction. And let me bring in the loop 1 second, the international sort of goals that we're discussing today. For example, the High Seas Treaty, the UN plans to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. This means investing in protecting biodiversity. Or if we look at the European strategic guidelines for sustainable aquaculture, they basically call for reducing our reliance on fish meal, fish oil, and so suggesting a transition from carnivorous species to low trophic species. So if we take a look at this, let's say international ambitious objectives, like sustainable objectives, octopus farming really, really goes against all of these goals as well. So I think we could be investing our energies, the time and resources into other solutions, like, for example, plant-based alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, those are great points, Julia. But despite these facts, it seems like the recent developments in Spain, for example, indicate that corporations are just further advancing the efforts to breed octopuses in captivity. So could you elaborate on these developments and discuss, the broader implications for animal welfare and sustainability?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more in depth about the situation in Spain, because that's quite alarming. Honestly, we are monitoring, of course, with our partners in the EU, such as Eurogroup for Animals, Compassion World Farming, Animal Naturalis. There's so many NGOs, honestly, luckily invested in this topic. But I can give a recap of what's happening very lately. So a Spanish seafood company obtained an aquaculture permit to establish a research hatchery aimed at breeding octopuses. Now, when you look into the permits of the company, they assert that this initiative is purely for research purposes. So it's not for commercial production. But then when you read the permit application, it refers to industrial exploitation. So this is, again, another gray legal area, because these animals are technically research animals, but the ultimate objective is industrial exploitation. So this also makes me wonder, this is blurring a little bit the lines, in my view, from research to farming. And this is not new, though. For people that have been following the development in Spain, this development actually follows an earlier plan by another Spanish company, which proposed establishing, at the time, was the world's first commercial octopus farm. Actually, their proposed facility actually faced so much criticism, I mean, from us at Aquatic Life Institute included, that the Canary Island government actually rejected the company's initial environmental impact assessment, and now they're requesting a more comprehensive evaluation, before any steps can be taken. So we've touched on the profound ethical implications of octopus farming. Maybe the last thing that I want to bring to this is the fact that public sentiment in the European Union really reflects this concern that we've talked about so far. When I was studying some precedents in the European Union, I could see the ban on the sealed products, and that ban was really driven by the objective was to protect public morals. So when you connect this to a survey that was conducted recently that revealed that basically majority of European citizens think that public funds should only support farming practices that really ensure high welfare and are sustainable. Once you bring those together, there's a lot of synergies that I see, right? So I think this is the time that the European Union, especially because all the attention that Spain is getting on this topic, should really take some more firm, proactive and decisive action. I don't think that allowing companies, whether they are research facilities or not, to continue just research into octopus breeding for potential farming purposes, I just don't think that that's the right path that we should be taking right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally on board with you, Giulia, but some people might ask, if octopus farming is still in its early stages and would only affect a relatively small number of animals, why are we focusing so much energy on this species in particular? Why not direct our efforts to those who are suffering in massive numbers, like chickens or pigs? How would you respond to this line of thinking?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Paulina. It's a question I've tried to answer before, and let me just start by saying my answer is not gonna make everybody agree with me, which is great, because I think that in our movement as advocates or lawyers in general, we need to have different strategies and different approaches. So this is a strength, not a weakness. So what I believe is that I think we need to work at all levels. So mitigating suffering where it already exists, as well as preventing new forms of suffering before they begin. And this is exactly why I focus so much on octopus farming, because we still have time. We still have time to stop it, right? There is a very rare moment where there's no entrenched infrastructure, there's no massive industry that we have to try to unwind. So this really means that a preemptive ban could really prevent decades of cruelty and harms. And sometimes to convince people of my argument, I make the comparison with broiler chickens, right? If we could go back 70 years ago, when basically there was the moment where industrial poultry farming was really rising, right? Imagine if at the time we managed to successfully challenge the breeding of fast-growing chickens, right? Imagine today we would be in a very, very different place, right? Instead of dedicating tons of resources and skills trying to undo decades of genetic and systemic damage, we could focus on something else. And that is sort of the hope that I have for octopus. We do have a window to allow us to do things differently. We can solve the problem before it starts, rather than 50 years from now having other advocates sitting at a table figuring out welfare standards for farmed octopuses.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating perspective. Thank you. And just to continue on this inspiring note, there have been significant legislative efforts in the US to preemptively ban octopus farming, both on the federal and state levels. Would you be able to walk us through this, how this momentum has developed and sort of what the legal landscape is currently looking like?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we stop talking about the suffering for a moment, which I think will be nice for the audience as well. So in the US, we've honestly witnessed an amazing and encouraging trend, I would say, towards preemptive legislation. Let me take also my notes, because I want to make sure I tell you guys everything about that's going on at the state level. But first, at the federal level in the US, the Octopus Act was introduced this past July, so July 2024, by Senator Whitehouse and Murkowski. And this ban, which is called the Octopus Act, Americans love acronyms, but I think this is a perfect title for this act. Really what it does, it proposes a nationwide ban on commercial octopus farming, as well as on imports of farmed octopus products, should they ever become available on the market. So this is, of course, very encouraging. And momentum, as I mentioned, hasn't just stopped at the federal level, but several states have taken action. So I'll walk you through sort of what's going on since the very first legislation that got passed. So Washington State was the very first state to pass a ban that was signed into legislation about 1 year ago, so around March 2024. California followed Washington State in October 2024, and the bill actually doesn't just ban octopus farming, but it also bans the sale of farm-dairy octopus, again, should they ever become available on the market. 1 month later, so in November 2024, New Jersey introduced bills aimed at banning octopus farming. Connecticut, again, in January 2025, so we're talking very recently, also introduced a bill. And then subsequently, we have Hawaii and Oregon in February 2025 that introduced additional bills. And lastly, very, very recently, North Carolina, this March, so it was a couple of weeks ago, a bill was introduced. So maybe as a brief to recap, to date, Washington State and California have enacted full bans, but as you heard, several other states are in active legislative phases, I would say. And maybe the one thing that I want to highlight about this movement, what I really find powerful and interesting, is that many of these efforts are bipartisan, and they are rooted in the clear recognition that octopus farming is ethically indefensible, environmentally unsound, and simply unnecessary, which honestly, I think it's probably the best victory out of all these successes.
Yeah, so are you optimistic that other countries will also follow suit? And would you be able to tell us a little bit more about how the Aquatic Life Institute in particular has contributed to these bans on octopus farming?
Yeah, so let me first comment that we are indeed working with several additional jurisdictions. I can't share too much details for now, but at least I'm leaving you with some suspense. So to leave folks keep engaged in the topic, because there are several developments that are coming up. And as when it comes to our role, I would say that we've played, a significant role in a little bit in all of these efforts, because we work closely with legislative offices. We craft and provide, policy briefings to other advocates, lobbyists. We review bill languages and help drafting the bills. And of course, we do a lot of coordination within the national and international partners, given our global focus. To make a practical example, for the Washington State bill, we submitted written testimony, and in California, our head of research, Tessa Gonzalez, even flew there to give an in-person expert testimony. So this is just maybe a mix of all the activities that we do related to this topic, but I want to flag that there's no way that a single organization could have achieved all that has been achieved by itself. This is definitely a collective effort between advocates, legal experts, researchers, and members of the general public. And I just want to name a few, because these are people that I have huge admiration for, and they're driving much of chunk of this work. So Animal Rights Initiative, Animal Legal Defense Fund, Voters for Animals, but even Mercy for Animals, THL. There's so many, honestly, that are supporting these efforts and driving legislative efforts. So that's the key, I think, right? Coordinated advocacy. It's really what makes the difference. Yeah, as I mentioned, outside the US, we're actively engaged in other jurisdictions. Yes, I can't go into details, but stay tuned. There's more to come.
Hearing all that makes me very optimistic. And although there seems to be all this momentum that's clearly building, would you be able to tell us a little bit about the biggest obstacles in this campaign and what you think the way forward is? So specifically, if you could tell us a little bit of the Aquatic Life Institute's strategy of focusing on legislative reform and sort of the key lessons from your work and experience in advocating for aquatic animals and working to prohibit farming one species of animal in particular.
Yeah, sure. I mean, honestly, this campaign has moved very, very quickly. So in just a couple of years, we went from raising early alarms about octopus farming to, securing the first legislative ban. That's really, really a huge shift. And that's why I became so passionate about this type of proactive work. Of course, as you mentioned, I mean, we have faced, and I would say we are facing still challenges on this topic. Maybe the first that is more general and maybe not what people would expect, but the lack of public familiarity with aquatic animals is a big, big issue, especially when it comes to octopuses. Like most people don't know that these animals are even being considered for intensive farming settings, and when they hear it, they are sort of shocked. So ignorance, in a good way of using the term, is a big issue. Another issue is, of course, the regulatory framework. Welfare in general, like animal welfare in general, I would say it's poorly regulated anywhere. I don't think I'm generalizing. I don't think we're doing a good job in any jurisdiction. But when it comes to aquatic animals specifically, their welfare, when it comes to regulating their welfare, this often falls like between different legal categories. There's different and multiple agencies that are in charge. So any action, whether it's from even with good intentions, can easily get slowed, or it can be inconsistent if you don't know which agency you should be talking to, right? And that's exactly why like legislative reform was such a priority for me, because legislation can help us, draw the line, can set boundaries and can help us really say, okay, that's it, that is not acceptable. So more specifically, when you mention like Aquatic Life Institute strategy, what we do is that we combine. So we combine, I would say, science-based advocacy, coalition building, as I mentioned before, but also like engagement, like media engagement, because we need to make the issue both, visible, but also show people that it is politically viable. So we do, I would say, we do a little bit of everything to support legislative efforts. Maybe one of the most effective choices that I'd like to say that we made regarding this campaign was really to, narrow it down, to really focus on one animal, the octopus, our champion animal, right? They really helped us start engaging audiences who, I don't know, might not otherwise think about like aquatic animal welfare at all. So again, going back to the point that I made at the beginning, while the campaign, yes, is about octopus farming, it's also really about building, political will, public empathy, and legal frameworks that really can extend to other aquatic species. So yeah, I would say the octopus probably helped us open a door.
So the suffering of farmed octopus is sort of exposing deeper structural problems in the way that aquatic food production is being approached generally. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's what I meant at the beginning. I always talk about octopus farming because it's important per se, in my view, but it is also a clear symptom of like much deeper issues. It's the model of food production that again prioritizes efficiency and output over the well-being of animals, the well-being of ecosystem, public health, local communities. So let me say that octopuses maybe are like the extreme example, but the underlying logic of octopus farming is nothing new. Like industrial aquaculture has grown rapidly, and we didn't really stop and question whether these systems are appropriate or ethical for the animals involved. So I think that octopus farming really brings this type of contradictions in the aquatic food system space into the focus, right? We hope that by presenting octopus farming to policymakers, legislators, and as I said, like the public, we do invite people to ask the question like, okay, where do we draw the line? Should we really use profit as the metric to decide what we do next in our food system. So yeah, again, that's why this campaign is really about more than just preventing one new industry, right? It's really about disrupting this broader pattern.
Wow. So, I mean, on that note, I'll just ask you one more sort of final question. What do you think are the best ways for those of us who are not legal practitioners to get involved in this campaign against octopus farming? On your website, I saw that you have petitions to sign. What are some other, ways for members of the public to get involved?
Yeah, well, there's a lot actually people can do. I do believe that every action really does make a difference. Again, you don't need to be a lawyer, you don't need to be a policymaker to influence, the direction of this campaign. In fact, I mean, public engagement is probably one of the most powerful tools that we have when it comes to preventing octopus farming. A great place to start is getting informed, sharing what you learn. So as you mentioned, Paulina, we do have a comprehensive campaign page. I believe the link is being shared somewhere in the chat. So that includes really a variety of resources, and I encourage you to take advantage of those, raise awareness in your networks. If you want something lighter but still very interesting, you can watch movies like My Octopus Teacher or read the book like The Soul of an Octopus. I think these tools help people connect, emotionally and intellectually with who these animals are. There's petitions, of course, that you can sign. I think on our website, we have several petitions, among them the Avaz one that has over 1 million signatures, which is quite powerful. And I mean, if you're interested in going further, don't stop there. You can connect with the organizations working on this issue. As I mentioned, at Aquatic Life Institute, our role is more focusing on the policy and science side of the issue. So we provide evidence, shaping legislation, and supporting coalition building. But as I told you, there's so many of our partners that engage in other efforts, like grassroots efforts, lobbying, public outreach. So there is really space for any type of skill and approach in the movement, I would say. So yeah, maybe my last point is keep showing up, right? Keep showing up at events like this, participate in in discussions like this, ask questions. Like the more you immerse yourself in the issue, the better equipped you are to successfully advocate for the protection of these animals.
And Giulia, just one more thing. I realized that you didn't share the 3 Rs yet. So just before we open up the discussion, would I just be able to quickly ask you to explain to, our audience today, what the Aquatic Life Institute has as sort of a vision for transforming aquatic food systems in general, just in terms of the 3 Rs that are listed on your website, if we could end off on that note.
Yeah, of course. And this can tie back, to one before I was saying that we're really using, I don't like to use it, leveraging the qualities of octopuses, right? For really as a strategic entry point to create broader change. I think I said in a past interview that octopuses have helped us bridge the empathy gap. And when I said that, I was like, oh, that's really what's happening. Once people really understand why farming octopuses is wrong, they are more open, to questioning and other accepted practices, like in general, like the farming of carnivorous species in general. So this could challenge the very salmon farming industry itself, or even the inhumane slaughter of wild-caught species, which have basically no consideration for their welfare. So I would say this campaign fits within Aquatic Life Institute, our broader theory of change, which we express through a specific framework, which is called the 4 Rs. So each R basically reflects to a distinct but complementary strategy for transforming aquatic food system, right? So in a way that they reduce the suffering and also promote long-term sustainability. So the first R is reduce. We want to reduce the number of animals that are used in aquatic food system. So this means, shifting the demand toward low-trophic impact species or minimizing the use of high-suffering production models. The second R is refine. So refine existing practices to improve welfare. So this means for these animals who unfortunately remain in food system in the short term, we advocate for meaningful changes in how they are treated. So this includes, for example, advocating and implementing species-specific welfare standards, enforcing humane slaughter methods, and so on. The third R is replace. So replacing animal-based aquatic products with alternatives. So we definitely support the development and the adoption of plant-based and cultivated seafood options that can meet, the protein needs without causing any animal suffering. And then last but not least, of course, the fourth R is reject. So reject the introduction of new species into farming systems. I mean, if you've been paying attention, you probably guessed that that's where the Octopus campaign directly fits into. So in short, that last R is really all about setting limits, and the Octopus farming ban campaign is really helping us doing that.
Well, thank you so much, Giulia, for your response and for your time. I think I speak on everyone's behalf that this has been a very insightful conversation with all your expertise and your important work. So thank you so much again today. And I want to thank everyone who attended today's seminar. We have our next seminar that will be open for registration soon, and we'll see everyone in about 2 months. So can everyone please just join me in thanking Giulia for today's seminar?
Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining.